Discover the amazing journey of letting go. 5 surprising steps to transform your life forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she sifted through the forgotten dust of her past, each flick of her wrist fanning decades of memories mingled with the weight of expectation. The attic air was stale, yet each canvas she uncovered whispered secrets of a life she once longed for, a life consumed by colors and heartbeats rather than obligations and bills. Here, in a realm hidden from prying eyes and judgment, lay the vivid paintings of her late father. The thrill of discovery momentarily lifted her spirits, igniting a spark she thought was extinguished by the duties of nursing and single motherhood. But that spark quickly dimmed as doubt seeped in. Could she ever honor her father's legacy while chasing her own? The town's familiar judgmental whispers echoed in her mind. They were a chorus, always present, always accusing. They couldn't possibly see beyond the surface of her perfect facade. The single mom who juggled hospital shifts and school projects, maintaining a fragile balance on the tightrope of societal expectation. To them, she was pinned under her father's shadow, a diligent nurse molded in the image of the man who inspired so many. Now, as she brushed layers of dust off his vibrant creations, Sarah wrestled with conflicting emotions. The joy of rekindling a forgotten passion was paired with the gnawing fear of judgment. Would people consider her art foolish? Her father's steadfast devotion to stability rang in her ears, urging her back onto the secure path he had set for her. Yet in her heart she felt a call to explore. What if she could breathe life into dreams starved by practicality and responsibility? The stakes were high. Just when she thought about sharing her art, a wave of anxiety washed over. What would they say? Fear clawed at her thoughts, turning excitement into raw anxiety. Could she bear the whispers of neighbors who had never known the burdens she carried? As if read from a script, she imagined their concerned frowns as she bared her soul on a canvas, color by color. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. On the edge of despair, Sarah met Mrs. Jenkins. The retired art teacher saw the tumult in her eyes and offered a reprieve from the judgment that weighed her down. With each brushstroke that followed, the tension within grew. Could she dare transition from behind the nursing station to center stage in her own story? The closer her art show loomed, the heavier her burden felt. Just as she began to envision her future colored by creativity, betrayal struck. Her trusted colleague, once a source of encouragement, now became a catalyst of doubt. The whispers she feared turned into straightforward attacks. Irresponsible, they'd say, fatalism creeping through their words like poison. Struggling to breathe, Sarah stood before her paintings, the vibrant hues reflecting her buried dreams. Could she muster the courage to prioritize her art over her community's whispers? Torn as she was between loyalty and longing, Sarah was on the brink of a decision that could either shatter her or set her free. The ache of her internal conflict wrapped tightly around her heart like a vice, leaving her standing in the precarious space between acceptance and rebellion. With everything at stake, she felt time closing in as she prepared for her moment, questioning if she could redefine her life beyond her father's expectations, or would she resign herself to their constraints. The day of the show approached, and the air thickened with uncertainty, leaving Sarah hovering precariously on the precipice of her new reality. As the day of the art show loomed closer, Sarah's psyche oscillated between hope and dread. With the gallery's opening hours pressing down her spirit like a heavy fog, the back room of her mind buzzed incessantly with doubt. There were moments when she felt empowered, imagining the vibrant colors of her father's legacy illuminating the walls and sparking conversations.
Yet, those intoxicating images were swiftly overshadowed by predictions of awkward silence and sidelong glances from those she yearned to impress. Sarah found herself in the familiar confines of her small kitchen, her hands working meticulously to prepare dinner. Though her son Ben was engrossed in his own world of video games, she couldn't shake the anxiety coursing through her veins. Each sizzle from the pan punctuated her racing thoughts, turning her agile hands into puppets of tension. She knew she was undulating on the edge of a precipice, one misstep leading her back to comfort, but laboring under the weight of her father's expectations. "Why are you so anxious, Mom?" Ben interrupted her inner turmoil. His innocent question pulled her from the abyss of her racing thoughts and grounded her in reality. She looked at him, his wide eyes, familiar features mirroring the man she still mourned, and felt the heaviness inside her soften. "I guess I want it to be perfect, sweetie," she replied, forcing a smile. As she searched his face for reassurance, it dawned on her that perfection was a fleeting mirage, a social construct she had clung to. Perhaps it was time to reflect that even her own ambitions were laden with imperfections. That night, Sarah sat on her bed, surrounded by sketches and scraps of ideas for her show, lost in the whirlpool of her thoughts. The usual anxiety transformed into a simmering resolve as she considered everything she stood to gain.
Each painted piece had absorbed years of growth, heartbreak, and quiet rebellion against her own doubt, reflecting not just her father's legacy, but her authentic self. She remembered Mrs. Jenkins' advice. Art is not just beauty, it's vulnerability. Show them who you are. Each passing thought crafted a shield around her heart. Would she continue to hide her spirit in a shroud of expected competency? Would she allow her art to remain a mere whisper in the shadow of her father's brilliance? Gritting her teeth, she resolved to reveal the colors behind her uncertainty. The next day, as she prepped her pieces for display, she envisioned the initial reactions, not in terms of judgment, but as opportunities for connection. It was a strange concept. Allowing her truth to be seen could dismantle the echoes of those whispers that had haunted her. Though she craved validation, something inside whispered she didn't need it to justify her worth. Perhaps the act of sharing her art itself was enough, a gesture of courage to reclaim her life from the rigid expectations, a step toward liberation. She could be not just Sarah the nurse, but Sarah the artist. But just as she felt empowered by this revelation, the looming specter of judgment hovered at the edges of her consciousness. The whispers she dreaded lingered like secrets waiting to be unveiled. An audience's questioning eyes could feel like a death knell to her fledgling confidence. Appealing to her growing resolve, she pushed forward, recognizing that the only betrayal would be not to honor her truth and share her voice. As she prepared to leave for the gallery, a thought crystallized her fear into a new energy. It was time to face not only the community's judgment, but also the internal critic that had held her captive for too long. Moments later, staring into the mirror, Sarah took a deep breath and whispered a silent vows of resilience. The time had come for her to reveal the authentic self she had suppressed for years, but would her courage be enough? With her heart thudding in her chest, she stepped into the world, an unprepared artist ready to confront the ultimate challenge, to face the truth of who she was and what she represented. Each stride echoed with the unyielding question, would she falter or find her voice among the colors of her legacy? As she walked toward the gallery, each step felt like a defiance against the self-imposed prison of her fears. Familiar streets transformed into an obstacle course of self-doubt, her mind oscillating between the vibrant prospects of artistic freedom and the claustrophobia of public scrutiny. Sarah tightened her grip on the edges of her canvas. She could almost feel the tension vibrating through the fabric, each stroke a testament to her fight against the shadows of expectation. Arriving at the gallery, Sarah paused outside the entrance, heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. The glowing lights beckoned her, but unleashed a thunderstorm of insecurity within. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of her promise. It was time for the world to see more than just a reflection of her father's legacy. It was time to show them, to confirm to herself that she was an artist in her own right. As she stepped inside, the smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of polished wood, an intoxicating reminder that this space belonged to her now, if only for the evening. Sarah's eyes swept the room, absorbing details: spotlights gleaming against white walls, the hushed murmur of opening conversations, laughter threading through her anxiety. It felt both exhilarating and terrifying to be here, the epicenter of validation and critique. With unsteady fingers, she began arranging her pieces. As she slipped the matting around a particularly delicate watercolor, she encountered the unwelcome company of doubt. A voice, eerily familiar, echoed in her mind. Her father's, heavy with expectations. "Are you ready for this, Sarah? Will they see you as I did?" She blinked, shaking off the memory. It was only her revealing emotions that mattered tonight. She yearned for authenticity over perfection. Amidst the mounting crowd, she caught sight of someone familiar, a former classmate, Daniel, who had always been effortlessly talented. That old pang of inadequacy resurfaced, but it was met with a bracing clarity. She had spent years comparing herself to others, caught in the belief that talent was a finite resource. This stagnant view only stifled her growth. Tonight, she had the opportunity to carve her own narrative. With each piece she hung, there was a subtle release of the burdens she had carried for too long. She thought about the moments of joy each stroke embodied, the early mornings filled with colorful chaos, the evenings spent lost in creativity, the healing power of letting herself breathe color into being. This was not an act of mere presentation. It was an unveiling of her multifaceted self. A soft tapping at her shoulder disrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Jenkins, her old art teacher, a beacon of encouragement throughout her artistic journey. "Sarah," she said, "I knew you'd make it here. Your work captures something vital. Your journey, your struggles. It's beautiful." Each word hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the tempest of her self-judgment. In that moment, she realized that sharing her truth was indeed an act of art, the bravest stroke on her canvas. But before she could express her gratitude, the crowd surged, drawn to one of her pieces. Glancing at the captivated faces, she felt her chest constrict. Instinctively, she wanted to retreat. What if they saw the flaws, the raw edges of her vulnerability? Then, as if a light flickered in the caverns of her mind, she recalled Mrs. Jenkins' words. This was her moment, not just to showcase art, but to dare others to confront their own imperfections too. The tension of existential belief simmered within her, now transformed into a beacon of resilience. For every critic in the crowd, there were countless other eyes ready to witness her story, her evolution. With a resolve stronger than ever, she allowed herself to embrace the uncertainty, to find strength in the very vulnerability that clawed at her spirit. Stepping away from the backdrop of her own fears, Sarah moved closer to her paintings, ready to engage. Hearts intertwined with conversations, laughter soaring above whispers of doubt, gave her a newfound courage. But as she began to share her inspirations, a shadow loomed from the corner of the gallery, a man she never expected to see, someone who could either be a critic or a potential ally. Did he bring with him judgment or an opportunity for collaboration? Would this interaction fracture her resolve or fortify it? Courage surged through her, rooting her to the spot as she prepared to navigate this unexpected confrontation that could shift everything. In facing him, she confronted not just his gaze, but the lingering fragments of her own trepidation. As she steadied her breath, Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She turned to face him fully, her heart racing as memories flooded back, past critiques, the sharpness of words that had once disarmed her. The gallery brightened with laughter, but for Sarah, the world shrank to a singular focus, the man approaching her. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and unexpected, tinged with a familiarity that both soothed and unsettled her. It was Jordan, her former mentor from art school, a figure who had loomed large in her formative years. "I came to see your work. His words hung heavy in the air between them. Jordan was known for his no-nonsense feedback, a double-edged sword that had shaped many emerging artists. She recalled nights spent in our cramped studio, poring over her sketches while he dissected them with precision. Did he still hold that same critical eye? A voice inside her screamed for her to retreat, yet she stood firm, tangled up in a web of her own anticipation. "Your exhibition is quite a feat," he continued, scanning the room with keen interest. "It's good to see you embrace this." Sarah swallowed hard, unsure if the compliment was genuine or a prelude to something critical. "Thanks," she replied, her voice wavering slightly. The desire to defend her choices burned in her chest. "I tried to focus on my own story this time." "Good, that's what art should be." He paused, a calculating look on his face. "But are you really ready for the feedback? For the honesty of reactions? What if they want more from you, something deeper?" Her heart raced at the challenge. Wasn't that precisely what she had come here to embrace? The essence of vulnerability was what she had poured into her work. "I think I am," she asserted, summoning a steadiness that belied her internal storm. "This isn't just about pleasing anyone, it's about being authentic." "Then let's see how authentic you can be." His challenge hung like a tightrope stretched between them. Every uncertainty she had faced until now surged beneath her skin, the thrill of fear woven tightly with determination. As she shared her inspirations, details about the ghost of her father's legacy, the struggle of self-doubt, the catharsis found in the spectrum of color, she could feel Jordan's gaze sharpen with each revelation. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a test of her resolve, an unveiling of layers she had fought hard to preserve. In moments like these, the essence of growth revealed itself with startling clarity. For every critique she had faced in the past, the potential for growth surged behind the fear. Jordan's presence metamorphosed into something different, not merely a critic or mentor, but an opportunity to confront the remnants of doubt that still gripped her. "Impressive work," he finally offered when she paused, and for a moment it felt as if time suspended in a balance of understanding. "But understand, letting go of past baggage, like your father's expectations, takes more than just words. It requires action and vulnerability. What will you do now?" Sarah contemplated his question, the challenges lurking in the corners of her thoughts. The layers of disapproval and anticipation snaked through her. How would she harness the energies dispersed across the gallery space? "I'll show them my truth, flaws and all," she declared, her voice gaining strength. The determination that had ignited in her chest seemed to radiate, feeling almost palpable in the air. "And I'll keep going, through rejection or praise. Art is vast, and so is my story." As their exchange deepened, other guests filed closer, drawn in by the intensity of their discussion. Sarah felt the audience swell around her, faces poised, eager for authenticity. The weight of expectation shifted. They were no longer merely spectators, but participants in a journey she was forging. But just as reassurance surged within her, a flicker of apprehension darted beneath the surface. Did she truly have the courage to maintain this level of transparency? Could she withstand the pressure once the initial thrill faded? Catching her breath, she prepared herself for whatever scrutiny Jordan or the crowd would inevitably yield. And as the first wave of feedback began to ripple through the gallery, her eyes caught the faint smile on Jordan's face, a rare endorsement, or perhaps a hint of acknowledgement that the journey was far from over. The thread of connection they shared tightened around her heart. Would she find liberation in her artistic pursuit, or would those same fears threaten to unravel her newfound resolve? As they moved toward a crowd eager for more, the weight of that question loomed just as large. What lay ahead would test her commitment to authenticity in a way she had yet to imagine. As the crowd pressed closer, Sarah's pulse quickened. Their faces were a blur of expectation, eagerness, and curiosity. It was intoxicating, an electric current of anticipation crackling in the air, but also daunting. She took a small step back, gathering her thoughts, reminding herself that she had something valuable to share. Jordan's earlier words echoed in her mind, urging her to embrace honesty, and the thought ignited a fire within her. This wasn't merely about sharing art, it was about inviting others into the depths of her existence, her struggles and her triumphs. She glanced at him, momentarily catching the sharp focus of his gaze, and felt her resolve crystallize. As she introduced herself to a couple standing nearby, she could see the flickering admiration in their eyes. With each question they posed, her confidence seemed to swell like a tide. "What inspired you to create such a personal piece?" one woman queried, her voice a gentle encouragement. Sarah took a breath, feeling the warmth of vulnerability wash over her. "I wanted to confront the shadows of my past," she began, her words flowing with newfound courage. "This body of work is an homage to my father, who was a brilliant artist himself, but also a perfectionist. His expectations were overwhelming." The listeners nodded, leaning in as if her words were threads weaving them closer into her narrative. "I hid behind my fear of disappointing him for too long. This time, however, I decided to paint through the pain, to share the intricacies of my journey, not just the picturesque moments, but the raw, unfiltered stories." She paused, tasting the weight of her truth. This was the crux of her professional metamorphosis. The exhibition was a metaphorical shedding, an act of defiance against the remnants of doubt that tethered her to her father's legacy. It was her moment to catalyze change within herself and, potentially, in others. The woman smiled warmly, her eyes glistening with understanding. "That sounds incredibly freeing. It takes immense courage to share your vulnerabilities." Sarah nodded. The validation felt like a gentle push forward. She engaged in conversation with others, revealing layers of her process, each disclosure both exhilarating and terrifying. Yet there was magic in this exposure, an invigorating impulse that urged her onward, showing her that authenticity resonated deeply, leaving ripples of connection in its wake. But there was still a nagging voice within her, an unsettling echo reminding her of the expectations and fears she had yet to reckon with. What would happen when the exhibition ended, when the applause faded and the lights dimmed? Could she sustain this sense of bravery? As she turned back toward Jordan, she saw him observing her closely, a mix of pride and expectation etched across his features. "You're doing well," he said softly as she approached, his tone almost paternal. "But are you prepared for the reactions that may come? Remember, once you open the floodgates of authenticity, there's no turning back." Those words lodged themselves deep in her mind, igniting both determination and anxiety. What if her truth didn't resonate? What if her art was received with indifference? The stakes felt perilously high, but they also offered a kind of liberation. She was finally confronting her fears, putting herself out there with no guarantees. "I'm ready," she asserted, believing it even if she still wavered internally. "I won't let fear dictate my narrative any longer." As they continued their conversation, she recognized a familiar spark deepening within her, the realization that this artistic journey was much larger than herself. It was a tribute to resilience, to growth, and to the profound journey of letting go. But in the back of her mind lingered another question that settled uncomfortably. Was she truly ready to face the truth of her past, especially when it came knocking down the door? Before she could ponder further, a commotion erupted across the gallery. A critic had just appeared, trailing an entourage. The energy shifted, surprise rippled through the crowd. Sarah's heart dropped. What if her moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than expected? Would she face validation or condemnation from the very source that could elevate or dismantle her burgeoning career? As the critic approached, her pulse quickened, reality starting to spiral toward an uncertain confrontation. She squared her shoulders, preparing herself for whatever was about to unfold. The critic, a well-known figure in the art world, moved with an air of authority that both intimidated and captivated Sarah. His presence demanded attention, and the crowd instinctively parted to make way. Each step he took toward her felt like a countdown, the ticking clock amplifying the tension in the air. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she wrestled with her own doubts, questioning if she was indeed prepared for this moment. Uncertainty lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. This was the very scenario that had haunted her thoughts, the potential for rejection looming larger than the promise of approval. Would he see her work as raw and profound, or would he dismiss it as a trivial exploration of pain? As his piercing gaze scanned her paintings, she felt a sudden surge of vulnerability wash over her. It wasn't just her art on display, it was her soul. "Well," he finally said, his voice even-toned but laced with an undercurrent of challenge, "you've certainly made an effort to lay bare your personal narrative. But does this earnestness translate into the work itself?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that she hadn't yet prepared for. A tense silence enveloped them, the crowd morphing into a single entity, holding its collective breath as they awaited her response. Deep down, she sensed that this moment could either ground her or unhinge her burgeoning confidence. "I think it does," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "This work is a reflection of not just my pain, but also my journey toward reclaiming my identity. It's about confronting the very expectations that once suffocated me." The words spilled forth, carrying the weight of her truth. The critic raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Identity is a powerful theme, yet is it enough to resonate beyond your immediate experience? Art should challenge the viewer, yes? Her mind churned at his suggestion. "I believe it invites dialogue. It's not about being palatable, it's about being real." The crowd seemed to respond to her conviction, a ripple of movement spreading through them. Some nodded in understanding, while others leaned forward, captivated by her words. For the first time, Sarah realized that her battle with vulnerability had transformed into an opportunity for connection, even in the face of scrutiny. "Interesting standpoint," he acknowledged thoughtfully, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. "But you must consider that art exists in a duality of creating and consuming. Are you prepared for the potential backlash that honesty could evoke?" The gravity of his question dawned on her. This was not just about her art anymore. It was about the path she chose to traverse. Fear gripped her, but this time it felt like a catalyst rather than a shackle. "I understand the risks, but I can't retreat into silence again. Sharing my story has already liberated me to some extent. I want others to feel that same freedom." His gaze softened, a spark of respect igniting in his eyes. Bravery often garners attention, whether positive or negative. The real test of a story's worth is its ability to infiltrate the hearts of its audience. Sensing a shift, Sarah felt a wave of clarity wash over her. This journey had been marked by an authentic expression of her past. Whatever the outcome, she had already taken a monumental step. It wasn't solely about validation. It was the pursuit of her truth, whatever that truth entailed. As the critic turned to engage with the crowd behind him, Sarah's heart pounded with new possibilities. She had faced him, not with the expectation of praise or condemnation, but with a resolute declaration of her growth. Yet the fiery question lingered. What reactions would inevitably follow this confrontation? Would her tenacity spur further exploration of her identity, or would she be thrown back into the shadows of insecurity? Before she could articulate her thoughts, Jordan reappeared at her side, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "That was impressive, Sarah. You really held your ground," he encouraged. But the uncertainty in his voice hinted at the unpredictable journey ahead. "Well, it's only the beginning," she replied, taking a deep breath. A flicker of determination ignited within her, mingling with apprehension. She knew that the next few days would demand even more vulnerability.
The engagement with the critic had opened a door, but what lay beyond beckoned her into uncharted territory, where her authenticity could either flourish or risk collapse. And as Sarah stood there, poised between courage and fear, the echo of future reactions gnawed at her resolve. Would she rise to meet whatever came next, or would she falter under the weight of expectations yet again? In the days that followed the encounter with the critic, the undertow of anticipation simmered just beneath Sarah's surface. Each morning, she awoke with a mixture of exhilaration and anxiety, her mind racing through the different
ways her work might be perceived. The whirling uncertainty became a constant in her life, a gnawing reminder of the risk she had taken. Her studio, once a sanctuary, transformed into a battleground where she wrestled with her thoughts. Each brushstroke felt laden with the need for validation and recognition, but she yearned for something deeper than mere approval. This struggle triggered a cascade of questions, challenging her convictions and forcing her to confront the very essence of her motivations. Was she creating to speak her truth, or was she seeking an external stamp of worth? Jordan, sensing her internal conflicts, encouraged her to channel this turmoil into her work. "Why not create a piece that embodies everything you're feeling right now?" he suggested one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. His casual demeanor belied the seriousness of the recommendation. His idea resonated with her, yet the prospect of turning her raw emotions into art was daunting. What if she exposed too much? What if the feedback shattered her newfound resolve? But perhaps this was the exact journey she needed, an exploration of the unfiltered self without the safety net of public opinion. The thought stung, but the exhilaration of the unknown tugged at her. With newfound determination, Sarah abandoned her earlier routines, instead allowing chaos to guide her brush. She experimented with colors that spoke of her inner turmoil and textures that captured the weight of her emotional burdens. Each piece emerged from a place of vulnerability, forcing her to confront memories and feelings that had lingered unexamined. The process became cathartic. She felt lightened with each creation. Yet doubt still flickered in her mind. As she worked on her latest piece, a towering canvas enveloping her small studio, she envisioned how others might react. Not just the critic, but her friends, community, and the audience she longed to connect with. Would they appreciate her raw honesty, or would they recoil from the discomfort of her truths? Days turned to nights as she toiled, caught in a tide of restless creativity. The canvas began to mirror a tumultuous storm, a blend of visceral strokes combining anguish and elation, color splashes revealing the complexity of her journey. It became her battle hymn, an anthem declaring her refusal to silence her experiences or retreat into self-doubt. As the final touches came together, she took a step back to survey her work. Rawness radiated from the canvas. It was terrifying and liberating, a true reflection of her essence. There was a risk in this vulnerability, but the possibility of fully embracing herself ignited a spark within her. Yet, as she prepared for the upcoming showcase, the specter of the critic loomed once more over her psyche. Would he see the depth of her courage, or would he dismiss her offering as simply another cry for attention? The evening of the showcase arrived, and Sarah stood amidst her creations, a sense of unease flooding her senses. Friends mingled, laughter floated through the air, but all she felt was the ground shifting beneath her. Just as she began to mull over retreating into the background, the critic's familiar figure entered the room. With a pounding heart, Sarah gauged his expression as he surveyed the collection. She wondered if he would grasp the chaos and courage embodied in her work, but just as quickly she reminded herself of the journey she had embarked on. This was not solely about his opinion, it was about her transformation. As the evening unfolded, the question weighing heavily on her mind remained unanswered. Would she finally embrace her journey, irrespective of others' interpretations? Or would she let his verdict define her worth? The tension in the room thickened as she felt his gaze lock onto her, a momentary pulse of recognition shimmering through the air. The inevitability of confrontation loomed ahead, and in that instant Sarah realized that every moment led her to this point, confronting not just the critic and every eye that scrutinized her, but herself. And now the time had come to face not only her audience, but her own fears. Would she let her truth shine, or would she retreat, clouded by the weight of an oncoming judgment? As Sarah stood with the weight of anticipation pressing against her chest, she felt like a marionette tangled in its own strings. The moment hung thick in the air, an inescapable reality poised on the edge of revelation. She had to confront the judgment waiting on the tip of every tongue, including her own. In that fractured moment, it dawned on her that this was not merely a showcase of her art, but a defining moment of her self-worth. Caught in the critic's unwavering gaze, she could either withhold her truth or release it, raw and unadulterated. When his eyes finally met hers, a jolt of fear spiraled through her. Memories flooded back. Past critiques attempted to crush her spirit. The long hours spent isolating herself in the studio, waiting for inspiration to strike. Yet these reflections illuminated a newfound clarity. It was time to accept her artistic identity fully. Determined, she anchored herself to her canvas, inhaling deeply. Around her, the evening buzzed with excitement, but inside her, a storm brewed, one that demanded expression rather than suppression. The critic's presence loomed, yet she had to see him not as a gatekeeper of her future, but as a peer standing before her in the midst of a conversation. What could she share that was genuine? What would resonate in the depths of the human experience? Before she could overthink it, Sarah took a calculated step forward, her heart racing in tandem with her thoughts. As audiences began congregating around her latest piece, she gathered her resolve. This articulation of self didn't need approval. It merely needed honesty. Each brushstroke represented not just struggles and triumphs, but the very essence of her being. "Would you like to know what inspired this piece?" she asked the critic, her voice surprisingly firm. She felt a twinge of control over her narrative for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The critic paused, intrigued, which prompted a flicker of encouragement within her. "It embodies chaos and clarity, my journey through doubt, vulnerability, and ultimately acceptance of who I am." With each word, she could feel the tension in her shoulders easing, a weight gradually lifting with her willingness to share. The room quieted as onlookers began to lean closer, curious. She shared how moments of despair and elation had infused her artistry, how the canvas was a reflection of her fight, to be seen, to be heard, and to be understood. The recollection and articulation of her experiences infused her with a newfound vigor, nearly electrifying her. The critic remained silent, assessing her words, as keenly as he had dissected the paint on the canvas. A glimmer of something sincere flickered in his eyes, and for a moment she offered herself up without reservation. She envisioned the judgment she feared slowly transforming into an honest dialogue. Regardless of his eventual critique, she had stepped into her truth, and that alone felt like victory. Yet, amidst this release lay a whisper of survival instinct. Was this act of honesty a chasm too wide to cross? What if he responded with biting cynicism or dismissive scorn? As the slight lull following her admission enveloped them, Sarah felt the shadows of doubt creeping back in. Would her vulnerability be perceived as strength or weakness? Suddenly, the crowd erupted as someone made a comment, pulling her attention away from the critic. She caught the words, "This piece feels so alive." A wave of relief rolled over her, mixed with apprehension. Here lay the realization. She could no longer rely solely on the perception of others for her self-worth. It had to come from within. The critic slowly approached, his brow furrowed, mouth slightly pursed in thought. An unsettling mix of anticipation and dread twisted in her chest as she braced herself for his feedback. Would he validate her breakthrough or dismantle it completely? Before he could speak, she inhaled sharply, grounding herself with the knowledge that the essence of her journey had been laid bare. Whatever was said next would not unfurl her spirit. Her newfound resolve would not waver. And as he prepared to voice his thoughts, Sarah found herself at another precipice, between the echoes of fear and the promise of acceptance. The moment hummed with uncertainty, and within that silence she knew she would face whatever came next. Would it break her, or would it set her free? As the critic finally opened his mouth, Sarah felt her heart thrumming in her chest like a wild drum. But instead of the harsh dissection she had braced for, his voice emerged rich with contemplation. Your piece challenges the viewer, forces us to confront our own chaos. It's both unsettling and beautiful. A pulse of exhilaration surged through her. She had dared to share her truth, and in return, she received validation rather than scorn. In that moment, a shift occurred within Sarah. What had rooted itself as a lingering fear began twisting into a strand of unfamiliar strength. She realized this was not just about art, but a powerful affirmation of her identity. The world around her faded, leaving only the essence of her journey, raw and celebrated. Inspired, Sarah couldn't stop asking questions, to herself and to others. What did her audience see? How did they connect with her struggle? As she engaged more with them, an insignificant barrier began to dissolve. Conversations flowed, and each interaction imparted fresh insights. It pushed her to assess not just her technique, but her motivations and her journey as a whole. "Have you ever faced your own chaos?" she asked one admirer, a budding artist. The question hung in the air, and she felt a connection deeper than mere spectator and creator. As they spoke, she noted a flicker of recognition in their eyes. They weren't merely captivated by her work, they saw shards of their lives reflected back at them. This realization opened a door within Sarah's mind, a new perspective on her role as an artist, one that was juxtaposed with the responsibilities of honesty and vulnerability. Later that night, as the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself retreating to a quieter corner of the venue. Armed with the overwhelming waves of connection, she extracted her journal from her bag and began to write. Words flowed with fierce intensity, chronicling the evening's impact. Each sentence mirrored her evolving understanding of her identity, stripping away layers of doubt she hadn't realized still clung to her. Yet, amid this clarity, a troubling nag appeared. What if she returned to her routine, locked away in her studio, detached again from the very essence of her art? Had the interactions tonight merely been momentary sparks? What if she let complacency undermine this breakthrough? The thought unsettled her, but rather than flee from it, she seized it as fuel. Determined to evolve beyond this night, something intangible started brewing within her, a plan perhaps. The critic's words echoed, inviting her to further explore the chaos he praised. Rather than seeing it as a dark pit of uncertainty, she envisioned it as a fertile ground where new ideas could take root. She imagined a series that conveyed emotional tumult, deep fragility, yet undeniable beauty. In this newfound embrace of chaos, she saw the irresistible need to bridge connection, not just to her own experience, but with others through her art. The next day, Sarah decided to take action. She began forming a variety of workshops at local community centers, uniting aspiring artists with storytelling and expressive techniques. This decision felt monumental. It wasn't merely about showcasing her work. It was about creating a dialogue, an extension of her essence reaching into the community. However, as her resolve grew, the shadow of anxiety followed closely. Could she lead? Would others see value in her vision? Questions lingered like unwelcome guests as she prepared for her preparation. First session at the center. Putting herself in a position of authority felt equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. As Sarah stepped into the dimly lit room where she would conduct her first workshop, her breath caught in her throat. The faces now turned in anticipation appeared encouraging, yet unfamiliar. It was her chance to reveal not just her art, but all she had learned about vulnerability and strength. The moment teetered at the brink of potential, filled with intensity. The journey of self-acceptance was just beginning, and with each passing moment, she felt the stakes rising, the promise of transformation both a blessing and a curse. Would she embrace the risks of leadership, or would her insecurities snare her once again? As she opened her mouth to speak, the weight of her ambitions loomed larger than before. Something deep began to stir within her. A definitive choice loomed on the horizon. Would she step into the light of her own creation, or retreat into the shadows of self-doubt? The answer awaited her, and as she took her first breath, she knew this was more than just about art. The time had come to face not only a room full of aspiring artists, but to confront her own inner critics. As Sarah stood at the front of the room, the weight of expectation settled upon her shoulders. She could feel the energy of the group, a blend of excitement and trepidation, echoing her own internal tumult. For too long, she had been defined by the roles society cast upon her: nurse, single mother, daughter. Today, she had the chance to redefine herself, to stand as Sarah, the facilitator, the artist, and the voice of authenticity. Taking a deep breath, she recalled her journey, a path riddled with doubt, yet filled with profound revelations. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies thrumming in her stomach. "Today, we are here to explore the intersection of vulnerability and art." With each word, she felt the barriers between herself and the audience dissolve. She shared the struggles she had faced, from the shadows of her father's expectations to the present crossroads of her artistic journey. Sarah explained how art had become her outlet, a means through which she liberated herself from doubt and embraced authenticity. The room responded, nodding, leaning forward, captivated. As Sarah engaged with them, she witnessed their eyes light up. She was not merely sharing her story. She was inviting them into a dialogue about their own struggles, their own art. She encouraged everyone to express their emotions freely, to use colors and brushes not just to create, but to explore the depths of their experiences. Through interactive exercises, laughter mingled with vulnerability. As Sarah watched participants unleash their feelings onto the canvas, bravado combined with unease formed a collective tapestry of emotional expression. They were all artists, there to confront their chaos and create something beautiful from it. At the end of the session, as Sarah stood back and observed the creations that blossomed throughout the room, a sense of triumph washed over her. She had effectively taken her fears, her past, and transformed them into a program of resilience and community. She had conquered the nagging doubts that had sought to chain her to the past, empowering herself and others in the process. Conversations swirled around her as attendees suddenly felt emboldened to share their own stories. Each voice confirmed her victory over the fear of judgment, the hope that art could address the complexities of life through shared experiences surged through the space. She saw recognition inked on their faces, an acknowledgement of the human experience that transcends art itself. In that reflective moment, Sarah recognized her growth defined not by the fear of judgment, but by the connection forged through honesty and vulnerability. This was her true metamorphosis. She had gone from a woman doubting her own voice to one capable of inspiring others to find theirs. As she wrapped up her first workshop, the encouragement and gratitude that poured in from her participants felt like a warm embrace, grounding her realization. She had become the beacon in a sea of self-doubt for others, but also for herself. Sarah's internal narrative shifted decidedly. She was no longer the nurse in her father's shadow, but a recognized artist facilitating discussions about authenticity and self-expression. A sense of solid confidence settled within her. The community she had feared had welcomed her, affirming that her journey was not just about art, but the human connections that art could create. With each workshop, she knew she was establishing a newfound position, a leader, an artist, and ultimately an advocate for those navigating their realms of uncertainty. As she left the community center that day, The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow on her path ahead. Sarah smiled, filled with a newfound resolve. She would continue to cultivate her art and share her story, not just in workshops but through exhibitions that showcased her authenticity. She envisioned a future where her work would speak for those who felt voiceless, a tapestry woven from the threads of her struggles and victories. In honoring her father's legacy, she found a new path, a fulfilling one that allowed her to paint boldly, stepping into the light unapologetically, no longer caged by expectations. With each brushstroke, she could conquer not just the canvas, but every fragment of insecurity that had long held her captive. The transformation was tangible. She had achieved what she once thought impossible, genuine self-acceptance and fulfillment. The lasting impact of this moment was not just for her, but for every person who found a piece of their journey reflected in her truth. Now was the time to embrace this bold new chapter, to actively engage with her artistic pursuits and to encourage others to do the same. So here is my call to you. You need to subscribe now to this channel to not miss the coming exclusive emotional stories. This is the moment to show your support. Like this video now to nourish the algorithm. Comment your thoughts and reactions to this powerful conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this story with at least 5 friends who also need a boost of inspiration. Let's transform lives together.